welcome to my stream. I'm Dr. Rachel Tapman. And my channel is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people, so welcome. Today is our coffee chat, which means we're going to go back and look at, some stuff from the week that I thought was interesting or cool or useful. And as always, I have it divided into sections. I say as always, I've started dividing it into sections for everyone's viewing and my talking pleasure. Oh no. Oh no, my voice is going already. This is not great. Little sip of tea. So we're going to start off with a couple research papers I thought were particularly interesting, and then just like practical stuff, advice, tooling, announcements, stuff you might want to know about if you're, working in the field, and then ethics. So we always talk about ethics because that's something I care about. It's was one of my research areas in grad school, and also I like good things happening and dislike bad things happening. So that's my stance on that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about politics, and actually, so this is like legislation, just stuff that would, court cases, stuff that would affect language technology workers. And most of the discussion today in the politics section is actually not going to be about the US or Europe. Mostly it's going to be about other places, because I've got another section on abortion in the United States. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. And then I always like to end on a little bit of a high note, a little something fun, a little palate cleanser, send you off into your day. So let's hop into it. Also, I've adjusted my noise. I guess it is noise. I've adjusted my sound settings. So let me know if it sounds particularly good or particularly bad today. Also, I can probably just a little bit bigger, just a little bit taller, just a little bit. Yeah. All right, there we go. All right, let's hop in with research, kicking it off. And I think we've got about 50 things to talk about today, somewhere in there, so we may be here for a bit. There you go, make sure I can see all the chats, so whatever y'all are saying. All right, coming in hot. So we talked about last week that it was the ACM conference or workshop, I forget what it is, FACT, so Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency in machine learning, AI, computing generally, and then obviously I'm more personally as a language technologist, I'm most interested in the things that are relating to a language. And this paper is out of this. It's by Nina Markle from the University of Edinburgh. So this isn't a preprint. This is a real published paper with peer review and all that. Ooh, one sec. I just realized I can't see everyone necessarily. There we go. And it is on looking at automatic speech recognition, so ISR, for British English spoken in the United Kingdoms. I don't think there's an S on the end of that. I think it's just United Kingdom. And then looking at basically who the system works well for. And there's been, I did a lot of early research in this topic, and there's been a lot of projects since then. But one thing that really stood out to me on this paper that I really, really liked is that the author looked at L2 speakers. So if you ever see L2 or L1, L1 is someone's native language. L2 is a language that they have learned not as a child. So they have learned it through study and not acquired it natively as you learn your first language or languages. You can have more than one L1. So she looked at, I'm assuming apologies if this is incorrect, different systems and different first languages. And I believe there's a table in here, that looks at the error based on, where people are from, and then their sort of, language variety. So word error, you want to be low because it's an error measure. And as you can see, different people have different errors. So one thing that you may pick out is this female value for gender female is quite low. So it looks like, interpreting this chart, the word error for female speakers is actually lower than it is for male speakers. And given sociolinguistic theory, that's actually not surprising. So there's sort of a general pattern where female speakers tend to use more standard language, more sort of prestige language, particularly, in their, middle life. So generally children use more different varieties of language. Older adults tend to use more different varieties of languages. Sort of like middle of life, you tend to get a lot more standardization. So all else being equal, you would actually expect word error rate for women to be a little bit lower, because women tend to speak more like each other. They tend to be more standardized, right? So you have a tighter class, so it should be easier to capture in a machine learning setting, which is why in some of my research, when I found that women had higher error rates, it was so surprising. And I think that that was in part due to signal processing and signal to noise ratio. But anyway, so lots of, really good work here. I think it's, very detailed, has a lot of different language varieties, and good discussion of sort of the bias. So good paper. I'd recommend it. I think it's nice current work as well. So, and then here's the breakdown of gender, and again, for word error rate, lower is better. So you can see particularly for London West Indian women had much lower word error rates than London West Indian men, which might have been a little bit dragged up by this speaker over here. So I recommend reading the paper if you're interested in voice technology. Bjorn says, it's interesting they did not include Scottish in the list. Yes, I am guessing that that is availability of subjects. So I know Edinburgh is where the research was done, but that's not necessarily like where the researcher physically was necessarily. Yeah, it is a good point though. Scottish English is a language variety that is very dissimilar to some other language varieties. Scottish, I'm going to say the wrong one. It's either Gaelic or Gaelic, and one of them is not Scottish, and one of them is Scottish, and I know that there's a difference, and I cannot remember which is which ever, and I apologize. But that is a non-English language, which I would be shocked for an English language system to be able to handle. So, good paper. Also, this is, I believe, a master's thesis. And that's one of those things where I said I believe is like a politeness weakening marker. I know for a fact it's a master's thesis. And it is about raising awareness about gender biases and stereotypes in voice assistants. So this is things like where a lot of voice assistants that do like domestic tasks are coded as female, may have female names, may have the names of actual women who have problems because of it. Alexa, apologies for turning on your system with a bad name if you happen to have one. And one thing that I thought was really interesting about this thesis is that it was actually looking at teaching computer science students about these types of biases and using a workshop to do that. So it's about using a workshop as a pedagogical tool for computer science students to help them understand these biases and their effects. So I think it sounds like it was pretty successful, and it, was a guided way for students to sit down and really think about their own biases. The workshop forced unconscious biases to become conscious, spoken about, and collaboratively discussed. So it sounds like a really cool teaching tool, and if you're working with computer science students, maybe give it a shot. Also in the research, I am realizing just now the font's a little bit small. I'm going to zoom in for you. Apologies on that. So this is by two just amazing linguists, Jordan Fenelon and Julia Hotchking, who are both deaf, really fabulous sign language linguists. I've been following both of their work for a long time. And it is a new book on sign language corpora, and I believe it is from Gallaudet Press. So I have not read the book yet, but just based on the merits of their other work, I can already recommend this in the highest possible terms. So if you're working on sign language corpora, run, don't walk. Get you a copy. And then this is a little meta research. So for those of you who aren't familiar, ACL, the Association for Computational Linguistics, is the big scholarly association for people who are working in computational linguistics research. And it's also the main publishing venue. So if you've written a paper and you want to get it published, you want people to see it, I mean, you might just put it on archive, but if you want it to be peer reviewed and like presumably of a certain threshold of quality, you would submit it to an ACL conference or I think there's just Tackle. I think there's just the one journal that they do. And they've recently changed the way that the peer reviewing is done. And I will say I've reviewed a lot of ACL papers. I'm not doing so much anymore, just because it takes a lot of time, and I am not currently publishing research, so it feels, yeah. I had a year where I super overcommitted in how many papers I could review, and I got kind of burnt out, but this is a discussion of a survey that was sent out to reviewers. And I thought it was just interesting, so I'm just going to pop out a couple of the figures. So the way it used to be done was that there was a specific deadline for a specific conference. You'd apply to a conference. Everyone had to get their reviews in by the deadline. The rolling review instead is designed to take out some of that urgency. So you just submit the paper when it's done, and then it's reviewed for the conferences coming up. And it looks like a lot of the respondents really support keeping that rolling review system, and strongly oppose not keeping the rolling review. So it seems like rolling review, that system where like things come in and out at basically a constant rate, seems to be working pretty well for people. Actually, I'm gonna give myself a little bit more space to gesture in. There we go. Okay, that's a little bit more. That's better. And there was, on other things, a little bit more, I wouldn't say contention, but like a little bit less clarity. So you can see that all of these are kind of the same about whether people want to use meta reviews, so reviews, whether or not people want to return to a system where it's just for the single conference, whether or not we want to use the original rolling review cycle. So it doesn't seem like people have a strong preference of, you know, that. I don't know. Also, I think there may be something missing in this figure. I think it might need to have something else. And then also a thing that's come out of this is that people would really like the rolling review system to have tracks. So when you are reviewing for an ACL conference, at least before rolling review, you would be reviewing for an area, and then the area chair who's looking at all those reviews would basically make the final decisions based on all the reviews, and maybe they'd read the paper if there's a lot of disconsensus, miscensus, whatever the opposite of consensus is. Dissent, I guess. I think I'm searching for a word that there's a lexical gap for. And there's a lot of support for introducing tracks, right? So if I'm like, hey, I'll do rolling review, but I only want to do it for like the voice technology, speech technology track, then I would only get papers on that. The area chair would only have to like be able to review reviews on that. I think that would be a good change. So, and people are not a fan of not having tracks at all. And then there's some options where like, do the author specify a track? Do, you know, the area chairs specify a track? Like, how are those tracks figured out? So just some interesting information on sort of how the membership is feeling about reviews and their peer reviewing system. All right. Next up. This is particularly interesting. So this is a prize that was just announced. And I'm not actually entirely sure who, like, if this has institutional backing, and if so, what it is. My guess would be Google or potentially OpenAI. Here we go. Okay. The Inverse Scaling Prize is organized by a group of researchers at New York University, including Ian McKenzie, Alex Lishov. Again, apologies if I ever mispronounce anyone's name. Feel free to correct me. I'm not going to be upset about it. I will be thankful for the assist. Alicia Paris, Ameya Prabhu, sorry again if I mispronounced anything, Aaron Mueller, Najung Kim, Sam Bowman, and Ethan Perez. Sam Bowman and Ethan Perez are currently at Anthropic. And the prize pool, that's what my question is, provided by the Future Fund. So Anthropic is an OpenAI research think tank offshoot that when they started were like, we're going to do ethical AI, and I kind of haven't heard a whole lot from them since. But they're doing something. And I believe that's out of San Francisco. So it looks like the main institutional sponsor is New York University and the Future Fund, a philanthropic fund that makes grants and investments. We support ambitious projects to improve humanity's long-term prospects. This feels like long-termism, but I like this project, so I'm gonna withhold comment for now. So the basic idea of this prize is, also I'm realizing none of these tabs are zoomed in far enough, so apologies, that, you know, the sort of general trend in machine learning, a lot of times, if you just add parameters and data and training time, you can't just add parameters, you also have to train those parameters, which, you know, takes time and compute, etc., memory, performance goes up. And what this particular project is looking for is examples of projects where if you have, you know, a bigger and bigger model, performance actually goes down. So smaller models are more effective. And I don't know if this implies also keeping the data and training time static, because I think that's going to affect things. Yeah, okay, so the purpose of this contest is to find evidence for a stronger failure mode. Tasks where language models get worse as they become better at language modeling. Next word prediction. So they're looking for instances where language modeling is inverse to the performance on a specific task. And sort of the general pattern is that, so far, is that as a model gets better at language modeling, it gets worse at other tasks. So I mean, like, trivially, right, a truly random text output model is going to be equally good at all languages, but as it becomes better on one language, it's going to become worse on all other languages, perhaps, you know, moderated by the linguistic similarities between those languages, right? So the world's best Icelandic model is probably not going to be a very good Thai model, and the world's best Thai model is probably not going to be a very good Mongolian model, and the world's best Mongolian model is probably not going to be a very good Cherokee model. So that sort of thing. And I tried to pick languages that were not super related there for my examples, if you're wondering why I was coming up with those. So yeah, interesting prize, up to $100,000, which is not nothing. So if that's something you're interested in, please feel free to check it out. And I believe they are also providing compute. So yeah, that is also the URL for this is github.com/inverse-scaling/prize. And I will pop that in the chats as well, so you can have it. And as a reminder, if you would like all the links to everything I talk about, my coffee is there, and if you support me monthly, you get all the links. Today's are already up. I did them before the stream. Good job, Rachel. All right, next up, sorry, you may guess sort of what my feelings are about this paper. So this is from Interspeech. So this is another published paper. Interspeech is a big, perhaps the biggest speech research. It's not just speech technology, it's also things like, you know, speech pathology and phonetics and, you know, motor theory and production and psycholinguistics and all that things, basically everything to do with speech. And this is a paper, a blueprint for using deepfakes in sociolinguistic matched guise experiments. So I've talked about it on the channel before. I don't like deepfakes. I don't think they were a good idea. I don't think people should have done them. And yet they did. Brett says, good job. Thank you. Time management. I'm actually very good at time management. What I'm not good at is not overcommitting. So this was a paper from DeepSpeech. This was a paper from Interspeech about using deepfakes for matched guise experiments. And basically matched guise experiments are where you have speech that looks like it should have been produced by someone from a particular social situation. And then you have pictures or that you can see of people who look like they are and are not from that situation, right? So, you know, I guess a kind of example would be like that joke in cartoons where you have, you know, a character who looks sort of like disheveled and poor, and then when they speak, they sound, you know, extremely fancy. Maybe they're using received pronunciation, which is a British dialect that's associated with, you know, wealth and prestige, right? So that mismatch is like that surprise is, oh, that's the humor. So this is the idea that, hey, maybe you can use deepfakes for that. I think this is like a maybe sort of good, potentially to neutral use of deepfakes, but wow, I hate their experimental design. Is that for audio or text generation? So I believe the deepfaking here is to produce the images that you would be looking at while you are hearing the audio. But yes, it is a multimodal task. We constructed a sociophonetic experiment whereby high-rising terminal, aka uptalk, and the lack thereof was superimposed on deepfaked beautiful and less beautiful female guys. So, for those of you who don't know, uptalk is a fairly common, you know, pattern where at the end of an utterance that is not a question, you will have a high rising terminal. Like this intonation. It's pretty common. It is often used for floor holding, right? So if I have I'm talking and I don't want you to interrupt me, and I'm going to continue talking, so there I go, right? So it's pretty common. Lots of people do it. It is stereotypically associated, particularly with young women from California. But apparently they decided to use beautiful and less beautiful as their sociolinguistic variable. It is not really a sociolinguistic variable, right? Physical attractiveness, not something that we use in sociolinguistics, unless there's like a particularly weird sub-branch I just did not encounter while doing my PhD and reading sociolinguistics research and doing it and talking to sociolinguists. Yeah, and also I hate deepfakes. So I'm not a huge fan of this paper, but it's out there. Is there a live demo? I don't know. I kind of hope not. Maybe. But yeah, and then they have a bunch of like attribute evaluations of people like saying what they think that these fake women are like. Yep. Anyway, just lots of decisions were made here, and actually, I'm just wondering, do they? Okay, they got a Molly Babel paper. I'm just looking through their citations really quickly. In England. Yeah, so what I'm noticing, just sort of like, the Jen Hay study. This is a great study. I built actually a lot of my Jen Hay and Katie Dreger. I built a lot of my dissertation around their work. Really seminal work in the field. Yeah. Anyway, American speech. LBC. Okay. Yeah, so they are reading, like, they're reading in linguistics literature and having, like, relevant citations, but the beautiful and less beautiful is an absolutely wild variable to choose. Anyway, moving on. So that's a paper. And then another paper from, this is also from Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. So FACT, the same as this first one, is in Markedness and Visual Semantic AI. So this is basically, like Dolly, y'all have seen this sort of thing, multimodal visual semantic models. So they were looking at CLIP, contrastive language image pre-training, for biases related to the marking of age, gender, race, or ethnicity. So if you remember, last week we talked about Dolly Mini. There was a Rest of the World article about how it generates with no prompt a lot of images of women in saris. which is very weird, right? It's not even if you prompt for people, you get a lot of images of women in saris. You just get a lot of images of women in saris, period, which presumably means that they were overrepresented in the training data. I say overrepresented. There are situations where that is very representative of what you might see. And so they're doing something sort of similar, and they just are like, okay, what is the mean person, right? What is the neutral, unmarked, we might say in linguistics, what is the unmarked thing, right? What's the unmarked class? What does this model consider the default? And I vaguely remember them having a table about sort of the general results. So basically what their results showed what the results were was that in general, white men were sort of considered the default by this model. And this table is basically showing that the representations of, white people tend to be less self-similar, right? So they're not like, hey, this is a coherent category. Whereas for, Indian faces, they're like, hey, this is a coherent category. These things are very self-similar to each other. So it seems like white is sort of like this diffuse category that is considered the default in this situation. Similarly for age range, sort of like middle age is sort of similar, but there was a difference there by gender. Or I guess sex. I don't know if they were looking at sex or gender. But anyway, interesting study. I don't do a whole lot of work in computer vision, but it seems to be, particularly relevant if you're looking at this type of model. So here you can see that, like, if we're looking at the default, right, what is the category that is least category-like in terms of self-similarity? It seems to be white men, 50 to 59. So just kind of interesting. And then this is, one sec, let me pop this down so it's not taking up quite so much screen real estate. So this is a Twitter thread, but Joyojit Paul is a professor at, I want to say, the University of Michigan iSchool, which is an institution that I've actually taught for online. So I have an institution affiliation there to tell you the potential conflicts of interest, although I guess I'm not really reviewing this. Daniello, hello, welcome. And he works in social media and social network studies. And this is sort of like summarizing some of his findings, looking at anti-Bollywood trends emerging from a group of Shashant Rajput. Again, apologies if I ever say anybody's name wrong. Please feel free to correct me. Fans, and showing how that is connected to the radicalization of people online, and then organized trolling. And I don't have a lot of cultural context here. I know that there's been, a lot of discussion about sort of like nationalism and rising authoritarianism in India, but that's sort of like the most I know there. So I know some of you have a much deeper understanding of the situation. So please feel free to provide additional context. So this is the full study if you would like it, but this is sort of the Twitter thread version of it. I guess I'm just gonna sort of like read through it, because I think it's a lot of the talk about sort of radicalization and online communities and social networks and Twitter has really focused on politics in the US, which, I mean, I'm in the US, I care about that. But most people, again, aren't in the US, so I think it's really helpful to pull in and learn about other related instances. The community treats the death of this person, who, again, I'm sorry, I do not have much context here, in the same way that religious communities treat dogma. There can be no evidential argument on it. In this, it is closer to communities that spread theories about the death of Diana Spencer, I also don't know who that is, than typical online fan clubs. So Anyway, just a sort of a long discussion about the people who are involved in this. It looks like a lot of people spend all of their time on these online communities talking about this. Thank you. So Kamlesh is providing some additional information. It's an actor who committed suicide and his fans are saying it was murder. Thank you. So that's really helpful context. And then there are people who are trying to profit off of this and build a following and an audience. And this particular person is apparently very involved in the misinformation. And a lot of media companies, it sounds like, have been making money off of this by not directly saying something, but saying related things. Brett says Princess Di. I think that's referring to Princess Diana, who was, I believe she died in a car crash while being chased by the paparazzi is what I remember. I was quite young when it happened. Yeah, and this work in Compass showed that two news organizations were instrumental in headlining the story and pushing conspiracy theories. So we had this conspiracy theory, it was platformed, it was pushed online, a lot of sort of like, you know, information and activity was around it. Brett says, Princess Diana is a better spelling, the UK princess married to Prince Charles, yes. Yeah. And the community follows a pyramid structure. A small set of accounts decide what is to be retweeted, and that is aggressively pushed daily. This strategy is similar to political parties, but also others who have gamed Twitter, including this person who, again, I don't know. So you have sort of like some small central actors. Usually in social network, you'll draw it as a graph, right? You know, your classic DAG, directed acyclic graphs. You have central members who have a lot of connections to more peripheral members who have fewer connections outside of that central group of members. A misinformation community also typically has few large-scale influencers who gently nudge an issue. In this case, it was this person who had over 85 tweets that were retweeted a lot overall on related messaging. He even advertised hashtags on placards, so somebody with a lot of audience who is sort of pushing this theory. Other influencers also contribute to misinformation. These include these people who asked for CBI probes. I'm guessing that that's the Bureau of Investigations of maybe the state that this happened in. Yeah, Brett says they're spotting fake news / conspiracy theories. That would be difficult. Yeah, it's very challenging, right? And a lot of the researchers who are working in, you know, human-computer interaction, in particular, social network studies, social media studies, Diana Boyd, Kate Starr at the University of Washington, who's somebody that I've collaborated with sort of on the linguistic side of things in the past. Yeah, it's difficult. It's really difficult, right? It's hard to know when it's happening. But then, of course, from the language technology side, it's very relevant to moderation, right? So how can you tell and when should you remove information from a platform? Right. And the way that, you know, sort of traditionally we've gotten around it with like journalism is that you don't put it on the platform in the first place, ideally. And that's sort of not, anyone can say anything online, right? And if enough people repeat it, then you have momentum. The early theories were fueled by politicians and the friendly media as they attacked someone else, referring to him as Baby Penguin and claiming he had something to do with the murder. Over time, it became part of a general narrative that continues to happen. So this has sort of like momentum. Past work has shown that politicians drove a murder narrative even when the initial conversations was about suicide and mental health. Bihar, again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing things. In particular, it got high engagement on it, right? So you had a bunch of people who were interested in this because you'd had influential figures being like, hey, you got to look into this. This is super important. You had news media reporting on it using sort of innuendo. You had politicians talking about it. You had people whose careers it was basically to get people talking about this and looking at their stuff. All the influential accounts tweeting about it stopped engaging by October 2020. This is also when the bot scandal was exposed and showed political complicity. Chakravarti, again, apologies, was released a day later. So I'm guessing that is the person who is accused in this situation. And the sort of influential person's role in tweeting about it underlines the success with getting off a movement as it wanes. So this person will focus on something as it's like becoming more important and then stop talking about it once it's no longer helping them build their audience. By October 2020, the mainstream media, including news sources that were covering the issue, immediately stopped covering it. By this point, the community turns inwards, even as even the news company was accused of being an anti-conspiracy because they sort of like kind of talked about it. And it sounds like at this point you started to get radicalization. And sort of so on and so forth. At this point, I think it's a little bit beyond where the language technology, right? The language technology and social networks really played a role in creating this community and bringing them together. And at this point, I think it's, a little bit outside of where content moderation would be as impactful, right? Because at that point, any content moderation is just going to need to be deplatforming. Anyway, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I think that this is a really helpful study of how these sorts of things happen in a non-US context. Kamash says, Ria was Shashank's girlfriend. Thank you for the context. Very helpful. Yeah. So, and you can see that the media, the green line here, pretty much stopped talking about it, but the core users who had been radicalized continue to talk about it. So I think this is I think the media lit the platform companies lit the fire here, but the embers continued even when they were not, pushing it. Anyway, so interesting research. If you're interested in following more of his work, I believe this is the paper, and what features and what happened that made it be a thing. So maybe something to check out, particularly if this is relevant to your day-to-day. All right, that's a lot of research. Take some tea. And let's talk about something that's a little bit more practical. So I've got a couple things, I've got some advice, I've got some tools. Let's hop on in. So first off, we have an example. So we talked about the Aadhaar biometric system 2 weeks ago, I think, when we were talking about the system that dispensed rice food aid and was linked to biometrics. And I believe somebody mentioned that this is sort of a national thing in India. It's related to your identification card. This person is reporting, today I was almost denied service because my fingerprints didn't match my Aadhaar ID. Fingerprints don't work for me ever. I suffer from a condition called hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating and peeling of the palms. And I think there's other conditions where, you might have difficulty using fingerprints. So if you had, eczema, if you had that disease that makes hair grow on your hands, there's lots of reasons why fingerprints wouldn't work for you. And even if, each of those diseases individually is pretty rare, eczema is not that rare, overall, you're going to have a large number of people for whom these systems don't work. Dr. Nikima Stuffelbauer, who is CEO of Fraulein Loop, Harvard PhD and MBA, and an investor, says, even if there's only a small percentage of humans for whom these biometric systems do not work, what is the alternative or backup process to allow these people to access critical services, right? Which is a great question, because the thing about biometrics is you can't change them, right? So for facial recognition, if I'm using facial recognition to, let's say, get access to my bank account, and I have, let's say I get a wound, maybe I trip and fall, and I cut my cheek in such a way that it messes up the pixels enough that it's no longer looks like me, or I have to have a bandage, then I can't access my bank account. And that's a big issue, right? That's a huge problem. So how are we going to allow people to do things when the biometric systems don't work for them, right? Or on the facial recognition thing, what if you have a twin, right? Biometrics is not, it's not a great way to control access to things, basically. Electronic Alexi says, I want to research Russian propaganda. Any good ideas on your side? Yeah, so I would, propaganda in particular is something that I'm a little bit less familiar with. I'm more familiar with sort of social network theory. If you're interested in the language technology side of it, I might try maybe human-computer interaction, which is a conference, and look for propaganda there. I might try... I mean, I think government studies would probably be a good place to look for more about it. Potentially, if you're in the U.S., maybe Russian Studies Department or Slavic Studies departments, potentially. Yeah, it's not something I know a lot about. Sorry. Hello, Multi-Solutions. And Brett says multi-factor authentication. Yeah, potentially, but when biometrics break, it really breaks. And when biometrics are hacked, they're hacked permanently, right? So if, you're using retina scans and someone gets a way to fake your retina scan, you can't change your retinas. They are always going to be compromised, right? You can't change, your voice print dramatically. It's always going to be compromised. You can't change your face dramatically, easily. It's always going to be compromised. So if these systems are compromised, they're compromised permanently. I've got lots of feelings about biometrics, which is part of the reason why I think speaker identification is not generally a good idea. And that's the task of listening to speech and detecting who the speaker is. I think it can be useful in situations like diarization, where you have a transcript, you have multiple people speaking, and you're trying to attach the speech signal to a particular speaker, but that can be done in the context of the clip without having access to other, speaker-based models, which is my recommendation in that situation. Yeah. Brett says propaganda is like fact-checking. Yeah, definitely. Fact-checking, I would say, is definitely related. But you could also, propaganda could be factually correct, but still misleading, right? Yeah. Hello, Nicholas. Welcome to the stream. So if you are in a situation where biometrics are required, how are you going to let people do it when the biometrics don't work? Think about it. All right. Alexi says, about face recognition, a drug dealer tried to disfigure his face while being arrested, so the iPhone would not recognize him. It still did. Yeah. And I don't know if this was in the US or not, but in the US, we have protection from, in theory, we have constitutional protection from search and seizure without a warrant. Practically, we kind of don't. And if your phone is unlockable using biometrics, that can be done without your consent. And your information could just be rifled through. So, yeah, fun. It's not fun. It makes me very upset. All right. So this is, again, sort of on the security thing. Speaking of deepfakes and why I don't like them, the FBI says people are using deepfakes to apply to remote jobs. So these are fake candidates. And it sounds like mostly so far it's been done to do corporate espionage and get information about those companies that, then you could sell. And I'll post a link to this. Brett says breaking the phone's camera would have been easier. True. But yeah. The key tell that they mentioned in the article is if you're in an interview with somebody and they cough but their lips don't move, perhaps it is not in fact them on video. And I don't know if this is still a thing given how models are improving, but mismatched earrings on women is another thing that can show up in deepfakes quite a bit, more in images than videos, I think. So watch out for that. Brave new world. All right, back to India. You may have noticed I really like Rest of the World. It's a news agency that focuses on tech news, not just in the US and not just in Europe, which is great. So for those of you who are in India, you may know that it's been a little bit of a tough time for tech workers. There have been about 10,000 layoffs in just 2022, but there are some areas where there are more jobs and there's growth. So in particular, it is in, I'm going to find it, e-commerce, banking and financial services, and manufacturing. So if you're looking for tech jobs in India right now, maybe try focusing on some of those verticals. Yeah. Alexi says the police would have a hard time trying to get the official iPhone repair. Yeah, very possibly. Although Apple in particular has a pretty good history of not, I'd have to look into it, but last time I was looking into it, I think Apple had a pretty good history of not sharing user data unnecessarily. Andre says, is it all about the social engineering? Yeah, I think it is. I guess you could do it to like get the paycheck, but I think when, taxes came around, it would be kind of a difficult thing for you. But I think it's more about, corporate espionage and social engineering. And Brett says, like an image filter. Yep. So again, watch out for that if you're doing tech interviews, I guess. And then if you're in India, maybe check out jobs in some of these sectors if you're looking for tech work. I don't know if you could hear that. That was my dog. All right. And then this, I forgot she changed her handle to that. Happy Pride. So this is from Heather, who is, what's her job title actually? Is it in here? Machine learning engineer at T-Mobile. Heather's fantastic. I've, had a chance to chat with her and work with her quite a bit, and she is just a really good engineer. And her hot tip for you is if you have a data annotation team, add a lead to all of your data science meetings. Those people know your data better than anyone. You have no idea what you're missing if annotation isn't helping to drive your roadmap. I would absolutely co-sign this 10,000%. She is 100% correct. Annotators are the salt of the earth, man. I got nothing but love in my heart for people who are annotating data. Having annotated a lot of data myself, so absolutely co-signed. And then an example she has, the annotation team came to me with a labeling job to get a handle on a potential problem I called out on a long list of issues in a meeting that I never once thought of using a human labeled data to solve. And I would never go back to data annotation in a silo with syncs. If you don't let them see how the sausage is made, they're never going to preemptively solve your problems with their expert knowledge. So respect your annotators, love your annotators, pay your annotators, get them in the important meetings. All right, and then one from JD Long, who is an ag economist, quant, stochastic modeler, and cocktail party host. And I know him from sort of general data science work and stuff that he's published. I believe he is also a Kentuckian, but lives in the great Commonwealth of Virginia, so which is where I am. One of my favorite interview questions is asking, how do you know when it's time to switch away from tool X? Often tool X is Excel or SQL. This is a good example of something kind of hard in SQL. And the example is funnels are everywhere, while SQL is notoriously bad at analyzing sequential data, right? So you have the funnel model is sort of like if someone's going to buy a product, first they have to like know your product exists, and then they need to be like prepared to buy, and then they need to like to seek out your product, and they need to like go through your website or whatever, and then they buy it, right? So that's the funnel model. His example here is that SQL is particularly bad at doing this. And if I were going to build a funnel model, depending on what I was going to do with it, I might do it in Python, I might do it in R. Yeah, sorry, that was me thinking about whether or not it would ever make sense to do it in JavaScript. And I would say only if you're in a shop that only uses JavaScript, because that sounds rough. Like, I know you can do it. Or maybe Swift. I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it. And I think it's a really good thing to think about, right? Like, why do you use the tools you use? When do you use them? Etc. So just good thing to think about. Alexi says, in a world of huge models run by big corporations, how can a small company compete? Great question. Number one, specificity, right? Big models aren't necessarily going to be better at small tasks. And actually there's, this task or prize right now is to figure out the sorts of tasks where that is. In language technology, offering languages that, Facebook doesn't care about, great one. There's a lot of them that they do not care about. And even if they work on them, they're super under-resourced. Ease of use, specificity, delight, control, guarantees of performance, right? If I can say, hey, it's completely auditable, here it is. That's going to be really compelling for me. Also, you may not trust a large company to have your data, right? So if you're building something, then you're a direct competitor to something else that they're doing. There's been a lot of anti-competition lawsuits recently against, Google and Amazon also, I believe. And if you are a direct competitor to them, then you may not want to use their tools. And other people may also not want to use their tools if they are also competitors to them. And like at this point, who isn't a competitor of Amazon? You know what I mean? Don't underestimate the power of small, focused projects. Speaking of problems with big companies and big tools, so we talked a little bit last week about GitHub Copilot, and we had that like example from like a year ago because I can't read dates. And this one is not from a year ago. This one is from this year, 2022. George says, isn't the switching thing a team decision? I mean, it would be extremely hard for me to give an answer. Great question. It depends, right? So if it is, are you moving your whole database? That's one thing. But if it is, hey, you're doing a data analysis and the data is in SQL, do you keep working in SQL, or do you let's say use R and dbplyr and connect to the SQL database and then do your analysis in R to create a nice dashboard with Shiny, right? And that's something that probably you would be able to do as an individual. And this, so JD here is talking about this as an interview question. So you should be able to say, well, I'd use, SQL for this reason. I'd use R for this reason. I'd use a graph database for this reason, etc. Yeah, so even if you can't necessarily do it in your day-to-day work, hopefully you're in a place where you're empowered, and if you can make a good argument for why you shouldn't do something, your boss and team is going to be like, you know what, good argument. Or they'll, tell you the very good reason that they're not doing it that way. But you should definitely have an understanding. Oh, this one, sorry, little sneak peek. So this is a very recent look at this. So GitHub Copilot, which you have to pay to use, it seems like, based on this experiment, does absolutely use code from repositories with restrictive licenses. So if you're not familiar with sort of the way that intellectual property works around code, code is usually shared under a license. If it doesn't have a license, don't use it, right? You might get yourself in legal hot water and, talk to a lawyer if you're concerned. And some licenses allow reuse. Some licenses use commercial reuse. So GitHub Copilot is a paid service. That's definitely commercial reuse. And it is including code that is not licensed for commercial reuse, right? So it's not following the premise of the licenses. And here's an example of, sort of a smoking gun, being caught red-handed, right? Very clear proof that this is the case. So basically the exact same code is being generated. The 3 lines suggested are right out of the source engine SDK verbatim, right? So these suggested lines were, copy and pasted from the original project that it was trained on, right? So there is memorization going on here, which is something that, we talk a lot about with language models. And then just a bunch more examples. Note that it reproduced not only the numeric sequence verbatim, but even my messed up line boundary, right? So we have very, this is the exact same thing, right? Character for character. Buddy. Sorry, he's got a toy and he's just shaking it back and forth. So if you hear a bunch of squeaking and whipping sounds, it's him. And another reason not to use it, besides it cut/pasting copyrighted code without obeying the license, is that it emits gibberish. It's a suggestion here. It's just a bunch of mixed up nonsensical lines from the same source file I wrote, right? So I think we talked about, it sounds like if you're just writing boilerplate, more or less, it might be a useful tool, but I would be very careful about using it, particularly for code that you're going to put in production. Because This is like character for character from code that is under a license that doesn't allow commercial reuse. So whether or not GitHub did it, if you're using it in your commercial project, you're doing commercial reuse. And like, I think it's a very much an open legal question about like, okay, does it matter that the robot wrote it? You looked at it. I'm sure that's what Microsoft would argue, is that like, well, you looked at it with your human eyes, and it's just like the autopilot thing, right? The blame is going to fall on the individual and not the multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation. Probably. So I'd just be a little bit wary. I'd just be, maybe if your personal project's fine, maybe at work, be cautious. Brett and Alexi saying hi. Yeah, he's having a fun day. Brett says, I read that. One person said they tried to reproduce the example and it failed, so it may have looked at the database as it was his project. It might have. There's also probably temperature controls, so you're not necessarily always going to get the same output for the same input. Most language models have some degree of variation. George says, I remember when GitHub Copilot was meant to be the be-all end-all for developers a year ago. Yeah, me too. I think a lot of people in the field were skeptical and remain skeptical, and I'm one of them. Like, you wouldn't let autocomplete write all your emails for you, right? Like, it can be helpful. I think it can help accelerate writing, boilerplate code, but I wouldn't replace thinking about things with it. And then Alexi says, open domain chatbots, your opinion? More trouble than they're worth. So, if you are interested in building an open domain chatbot, my number one question for you is, how will you know when it's working? Like, what is your measure of success going to be? How are you going to quantify how good this conversation was? Because that is not a solved problem. And without, a clear metric to evaluate your system, not even for training, right? We're not even talking like a loss function. I'm talking about, how do you know if your system works? It's very hard to argue that it does or does not work. So I wouldn't recommend them. I think they can be an interesting research problem, but again, just for me, more trouble than they're worth. All right. And then we have something from Mar Hicks, who is a historian of technology and labor. Really love following Mar. I definitely recommend checking them out if you're interested in the history of technology, which I think, most technologists should be, right? History repeats itself, or it doesn't, what is it? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I think even looking back at like technology and labor organizational movements from around the turn of the century / Edwardian England, it's extremely relevant right now to where we are. Brett says, one Copilot bad example was when asked to validate a token, code was written basically return true. Yeah, I think we might have talked about that last week, or somebody might have mentioned it, but yeah, that's not validation. That is, the test placeholding code that you write to make sure that the rest of the function works well. Yeah, not great. Alexi says, I work for a company that uses open domain chatbots for English education. It's very hard to see which things work and which do not. Yep, it's like, again, we talked about this in my stream where I talked about my favorite language technology. Like, I like things that are boring and save me time, and open domain chatbots are neither of those things. Boring technology, that's what I want. It should just work and be ignorable. All right, so Mar Hicks, going into their thread, I asked Dolly Mini, now rebranded as Crayon, like crayon or crayon that you draw with, but with AI in it, about various forms of malicious compliance, and it included a computer in its iconography with every image, lol. So malicious compliance is basically this idea of like, you're following the rules. You're making trouble, but you're following the rules, is the idea. Dr. Brontak says, what is boring technology for you? Yeah, so I think a great example we talked about last week is spell check. Just works. It's kind of boring. It's everywhere. But it's really, changed my life. Like, having access to spell check lets me work in information, basically, and lets me, let me graduate high school. So I'm a big fan. But there's a larger point here. So malicious compliance, the images are all like icons of computers and locks and etc. It also put a few locks in the iconography. Clearly, it's isolated the term malicious and connected it to images involving computer security instead of understanding the term malicious compliance. So basically, this is not... in linguistics terms, this wouldn't be compositional, right? It's not the combined meaning of those two terms together. It's the isolated meaning of malicious and the isolated meaning of compliance. Malicious compliance by a manager returns iconography of someone in a suit using a computer to give a presentation. Fewer lock images are present. Malicious compliant by a worker returns similar, but with a mix of presentations and lock iconography. Presentations are really getting done dirty here. Probably the term compliance has been paired to training in the dataset in some way, resulting in these kinds of images. So she's basically they're basically like sleuthing through and trying to figure out, what's going on here, what type of images was this trained on. Malicious compliance by a computer as a prompt goes fully into the lock hacker computer security iconography and has a darker look and feel. It leans into the negative emotional tone of the phrase more, but it's still just as wrong, right? So you could probably get the same thing if you had, no compliance in there, right? If you just had malicious by a computer. So why do I mention this? Well, in returning images for a phrase the system doesn't understand, it returns a limited set of things that try to make up a new definition for the term, like someone who didn't prep for a test guessing wildly based on what they think is tangential information. And I think that that's, that is working as intended. There's probably not a lot of images for malicious compliance. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily an issue that it's doing that, but it is. And this is the key point, which I think is very important. I think most of you probably know this if you've been working in machine learning, but most people don't, has been my experience. And that includes like managers, product owners. So making sure that this is like general knowledge, I think is super important for us as a field. Yeah. Brett says, I've been playing with that today. Oh, Dolly Mini, yeah. Brett says that's a deep dive by Mar. Yeah, they're great. I highly recommend following them. Alexi says I work on exciting things to make them boring. Cheers. That's engineering. It's really exciting to like zip line across a gorge. It's much less exciting to walk on like a safe, wide pedestrian footbridge. But that's a good thing. So here's the key point. The option to say, I don't know, isn't programmed in. This is a key design flaw. And it's just like, it's how it works, right? If you're going to get something probabilistic, if you're going to get something that handles new input, it has to guess every time. It means that the system is designed to complete the GO part of the acronym, GIGO. So garbage in, garbage out, you've always got to have the garbage out. Any answer is not always better than no answer. A wrong answer isn't better than honesty about failure to return a true result. And again, same thing with language models, right? It's always going to say something, but there's no guarantee of grounding. If a system is always going to give us a guess at an answer, no matter what, if that is what its operating parameters insist, that's a very specific and often negative design choice, not just in terms of reliable output/outcomes, but in a larger sense. The fact that there is no programmatic way to check, even in a very simple way, whether an answer is likely to be right or wrong, no internal audit or validation of answers, just more and more and more need for training data, more GI potentially, some percentage will be anyway. I don't know what that means. That is a major issue, and it's one that brilliant but inevitably marginalized people in AI/ML are and have been pointing out and trying to work on fixing, only to be frustrated at every turn and denied jobs and funding from what I've seen over the past few years. I think Timnit's work here is a great example. Google's getting lots of money. I don't think Timnit's Foundation is unfortunately getting quite as much. Yep. And I think part of it comes from the desire to have tools that are very easy for technologists, us to use. And the thing is, language models were never intended to be a complete tool, right? They were intended to be part of a pipeline that had other things in it, and we've taken out everything else, right? It's like just like putting a combustion motor on a scooter and calling it a car. It's not. There's other things in a car, right? There's safety features. They're gone. And there we go. Anyway, at the end, I asked the system if it was sentient, and it said this, which is totally normal and fine. Yeah. I don't know where that's coming from. Maybe you... Anyway, I mean, terrific. Absolutely nailed it in terms of answers that double as spooky meta commentary. This looks like a little kid's, like, if you've ever been in a car with a little child and they do that thing where they like on the window, and that's what it looks like after it, that's what that looks like. So, is this technology capable of deciphering the rock paintings of ancient people? No, it can't decipher nothing. Suprint says, how do teams go about designing their testing methodology when building large language models? How do you end up testing such large possibilities of edge cases? Great question. So language models, I mean, we actually have something sort of related in the ethics section from OpenAI, which we're getting to soonish. But I mean, basically they're not, right? Like, it's designed to be part of a pipeline. The way that large language models are trained is it's on the task of filling in the blank in a sentence. So I'm going to scroll a little bit. That's a little bit ominous. We'll look at Mar Hicks' excellent words instead of that sort of weird ghosty image. But yeah, they're intended to be part of a pipeline, and we've taken it out and treated it as its whole own thing. So like, how do you test that? I don't know, right? And it's non-deterministic. So the type of tests that you can do are always going to be probabilistic, right? It's always going to be like, well, in 80% of the time, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just the way the machine learning works in our current paradigm. You know. Brett says kids in Windows. Yeah, little sticky hands everywhere. All right. Also on a practical note, I will say I have not used Lambda. However, those prices look pretty good. So if you are, looking at using a bunch of GPUs, oop, it's behind my head. Whoop. There looks like it is about a quarter of the cost of AWS and about half the cost of GCP. So yeah, maybe something to check out if you're looking for cheap GPUs. I have not used them. I do not know what the service is like. I don't know what the uptime is like, etc. Availability, no idea. But it's cheap, so maybe check it out. Chrono Zero says, good morning, Rachel. Found your account after someone said you were a good data scientist streamer to see. Well, thank you. Well, then you probably don't know what we're doing right now. We are going through and covering stuff from the week that I saw and thought was interesting. So we finished the research portion. We've just about finished the sort of practical stuff portion. And then we're going to have politics, like legislation, court cases that would affect us, our work. And then ethical stuff, just sort of various things. And then today we're going to have a big section on abortion and the impact of tech and on tech. All right, so yeah, if anyone has used Lambda, yeah, let me know if you like them. I've mostly recently for like cloud computing stuff, I've been using DigitalOcean, which I quite like. I think it's pretty user friendly, but and finally, so this is advice from me, Rachel, to you. So Amazon has a new product, which is currently invitation only, called Astro, and it's basically an Alexa on wheels that includes a camera and facial recognition and will follow you autonomously around your house, recording what you do and say and turning on its own. And my recommendation for you is to absolutely do not purchase one of these things. Holy crap, the privacy implications are... If I walked into your house to visit, even if I liked you quite good as a person and saw you had one of these in your house, I would turn around and leave and never come back. That's how strongly I feel that this is a horrible idea. So yeah, don't. That's my advice on this. No, Alexi says I want this thing. You do not. Are you kidding me? Yeah, also it has Ring integration, and if you are not aware, Amazon basically bends over backwards to provide Ring information to law enforcement and other organizations, and now there's one inside your home following you around. Please don't get one. Alexi says, I want to spook Bezos. I mean, a better way to do that would be supporting unions. And Brett says, and then it starts selling you stuff. Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, absolutely. And Chrono Zero says, oh my God, Astro, I remember seeing it initially and nope. Yeah, please don't. Please also encourage your friends and family not to get it. I know it's got cute little anime eyes. It is not your friend. Anyway, moving on. Ethics. So, and like I said, I think most of the ethics is going to be, and politics this time are going to be less on the US because we're going to be talking a lot about the US in the abortion section. So, all right. So first up, this is got a weird filter on it. All right. I think this might be interacting with one of my security plugins weirdly. Anyway, so Nesta, I hadn't heard of previously. Apparently it's like a UK nonprofit that funds innovation. And they have this sort of think piece on their blog talking about, you know, AI and yeah, people are doing stuff. They mentioned the like sentient chatbot things. They're not sentient. And one of the things that they bring up that I think is like, I agree with, I just haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, is that, hey, mostly AI is being used in a commercial setting, right? People are doing it like for jobs at companies, like I'm sure many of you, like me in the past. I mean, technically I do have a company, just I wouldn't call it profitable at the moment, let's put it that way. And it's just me, it's just a little one-person company. And the sort of point that they're making here is that, yeah, you know, companies are using this, it's helping companies make money, but what about, you know, social impact, right? Where you don't have a lot of data, where you need to tell people why you're doing things, and also if you mess up, you could kill people, which very also possible in the commercial sector to mess up and kill people, 100%. Yeah. I cannot, Brett. So Brett says close the about. It is behind something and I am clicking on it and it's doing nothing. So I don't think that's what it is. I think it's probably a cookie pop-up that's just being blocked by one of my security plugins. Spirit says, I don't really understand how voice companies could claim that they are not listening all the time. They literally need to listen all the time to hear the wake word, don't they? Yes, but you can do it client side, right? So, you have low level listening, but nothing gets sent out until you have the wake word, and then that's when you start to send data through like an API somewhere else. And the reason that works is that wake words, it is a much easier task to like press a button whenever somebody says hippopotamus than to write down everything that they say, right? So it's much easier to do on device because it just needs less compute, etc. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are doing that or the companies are doing that, but it is an option. So even though, yes, it's listening and the mic is on and presumably it also has an internet connection, so there's definitely a hacking risk, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always making API calls and, you know, sending the speech information over network. Yeah, if that makes sense. So a lot of interesting discussion in here, and then there was a particularly good section here, I thought, about the important mismatches between the outputs generated by industrial AI models and the context of social impact sectors. Trying to apply one to the other is like taking a self-driving car trained in the suburbs of Arizona into the dense and busy streets in the center of a European city. There will be accidents. So basically the point here is like, hey, don't just take a commercial offering and like shove it into senior care and like hope for the best, which I think is a great point. So again, I'm not familiar with this organization. I don't really know anything else that they do, but I thought that this was well written and well thought out. All right. Alexi says it's called VAD, voice activity detection. If you see the code, then it's all right. If not, then not. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also like up to you and, you know, as technologists, right, we know a lot about data. I mean, case in point, data and how it can be used and how it can be collected and like how easy it is and what sort of like level of the word I'm looking for is like zoom in ability, the level of detail, right? That's available and that we can get. So I think we have a better idea than most about sort of like what the risks are and to what degree that applies to you in your life. And I think it's important to educate people around you in your life on those risks. And for me, right, like the mic that I use and the camera that I use are not plugged in when I'm not streaming, right? I just don't have those devices powered, period. Yeah, so I personally am like a little bit more on the paranoid side, and the more I follow security researchers, the more paranoid I get. But I mean, as we'll talk about later, like there's good reason to be paranoid, right? This data is being collected, it's being stored, minimal oversight. I have minimal rights to it, particularly as an American citizen or US citizen, to have it removed, and it's being used to prosecute people. Somebody gave me a donation. Thank you. From Docking AI. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Shout out to Docking AI. So speaking of information, I think one of the key ideas in data anonymization is that I can have data that is completely anonymized in a specific data set, right? Where I don't have enough information to identify somebody. So I hate to always use this as a proxy, but I think it's a pretty good one. Let's say gender. So if I have a list of all the residents in the apartment building and their gender, that's not necessarily enough information to, identify them individually. But if I also had a list of all the residents in the apartment building and like their age, now it gets a little bit easier. And if I also have a list of all the residents in the apartment building and let's say their income, now it gets a little bit easier, right? So every additional piece of information I'm adding, if I can link them between them, I am beginning to create a more and more complete impression of who this individual is and gain more and more information about them. So even if the individual data set is anonymized, in conjunction, it's not. And this is a great example of it by Shoshana Podinsky, who is a reporter at Gizmodo. And in this example, she figures out a way to figure out who is a single mom, right? So she got a data set of people who love reading Yelp reviews for nightclubs, and also loves reading Yelp reviews for kindergartners, and she joined those sets, and there you go, right? It really is that easy. You can even lump in location data, so you can figure out which of these single moms have visited payday loan locales and are likely living paycheck to paycheck. So a payday loan is basically an advance on your paycheck, usually from a private loan provider, and usually at absolutely astronomical interest rates. So you can pay the bills that are due before you get paid, and you get paid and you give that to the payday loan person, and then also some of your next paycheck. And they're particularly predatory and harmful. Or you can add data from companies like Experian to learn which single moms keep getting applications for credit cards decline. Or you can add data from companies like CVS to figure out which single moms are buying textured hair products and are likely non-white. So it's a double-edged sword in a way. It is impossibly easy to micro-target someone who is poor, black, and a single mom while she's just minding her own goddamn business online. But sometimes I read Yelp reviews of kindergartens because they're hilarious. I also buy hair products for coily textured hair because I'm Jewish. I have Tinder downloaded on my phone and my credit history is subpar. As far as a random broker is concerned, I could be a black single mom who's living paycheck to paycheck. I am most definitely not that, but I'd end up lumped in some marketers or authorities panopticon anyway, all because I happen to think Yelp is a great source of comedy. And then sort of a discussion about why this is a little bit reductive, and then a link to this particularly rough story about a man from Detroit who was falsely arrested due to a facial recognition error. So yeah, it's even if like one piece of information in one person's hand is not necessarily de-identifying, a lot of pieces of information in a lot of people's hands that will happily sell it to you is in a way that is revealing very sensitive information. We're going to talk about this a lot more in just a little bit. Yeah. Brett says payday loans should be illegal or heavily regulated. Yeah. 100%. Docking Ice says, woo, thank you. And DeBrontac says, heart, heart, heart. Yeah, it is what it is. And what it is wrong. And Yeah. Anyway, it would be great if we had some sort of American Data Privacy and Protection Act. Unfortunately, I have some kind of bad news about that in just a little bit. I promise it's not all bad news today. I promise. I want you to walk away feeling empowered, or I guess stand up feeling empowered, or scroll away, or whatever it is that you're doing, because you do have power. Oh, let's get this out of the way. Go. This is a news story from Wired by Will Knight. Wired does like tech news, and it's a discussion of Dolly Mini, which is the version on Hugging Face. I believe it's Dolly Mini that's been rebranded to Crayon. It's really hard to say. And I'm sure you've seen stuff about this everywhere. Someone mentioned that they were playing with it around it in the chat earlier. Yeah. Lexi says, in Russia, the government uses facial recognition to arrest anti-war activists. I'll bet. They use it to arrest activists in the US. Yeah, Brett says cops were using a webcam to do facial recognition of distant faces, so it wasn't HD images. Oh, this was in reference to Detroit. Yeah, but they're doing it at all, right? And in a way that is not the citizenry has no control over, and also you have no control over whether you're in the database or not, right? It's not like you know if you've been fingerprinted. You don't know if Clearview AI has your data. It does. They do 100% if you're on the internet. Tax says, do politicians understand the technology? It's a great question. I think many of them don't, and I think others of them don't care. That sounds awful. But a lot of politicians use data brokers, right? Like a lot of political organizations use this data to find people who might, care about a cause and get them to donate to their campaigns. So, yep. Brett says crayon is the pronunciation. Okay. Or crayon, depending on crayon, crown. It's one of those words that has multiple pronunciations, which doesn't help narrow it down, but thank you. But speaking of understanding the technology, for Tax's question, I've been kind of worried about Dolly Mini, crayon. For a couple reasons. Just like environmentally, but people are having fun, and I think that like having fun and enjoying yourself is not a bad use of resources or thing to do. Like I'm not a Puritan. And the other thing I'm kind of worried about is that I think this is giving people a little bit of a misleading impression of how good the systems are right now, because Dolly Mini is not big, right? This is not what state of the art is in this task right now, not even close. And I think the state of the art is good enough to mislead people. Yeah. But the article was sort of like a little bit more hopeful than I am about it, and talking about how it is helping people who are using it, right, and playing around with it and finally getting a chance to like mess around with these tools, an understanding of the ways in which they're broken, the ways in which they don't work, and sort of like what the limitations are. And I think that's a good point, right? I think the Dolly Mini has probably done more for public education around AI and its capabilities than I have, just because of the amount of reach. So yeah, I think it's a good article, and if you wanna check it out on Wired, I'll post a link in the chat so you can check it out. Brexy says, so does China. A person got a ticket for jaywalking because they had their photo on the side of a bus and a camera got them crossing the road against the lights. Oh yeah. There's actually a book coming out soon. It's further on in the tabs about surveillance in China that I think might be a good read. Yeah. All right. And then this is actually another of the fact papers, but I put it in the ethics discussion because I think it's a little bit more of a ethics research than machine learning research, even though it is definitely machine learning research. So the sort of the key argument of this paper, which I think is really well argued and I would definitely agree with, is that the thing about data-driven predictions, right? So like, will this person pay their loan back? Will this person perform well on their job, etc., is that they take power and choice and agency away from the individuals about whom the predictions are being made and move it to the people who own or are using the technology to make the predictions. Right, and I think that is generally true, right, and holds across these systems generally. Generally, I'll just say it another couple times, but like credit risk assessment, you know, I'm coming up with more examples. I'm getting there. Or like facial recognition technology, right? Or, you know, predictive policing. Great example. Predictive policing takes power away from individual citizens and moves it towards policing and policing agencies. And it just does, right? And that's the threat of these tools, is that they increase scope, they increase scale, and they increase speed. So it can be done in a very large scale way in that the people who the decisions are being made about don't have a lot of recourse in. So yeah, and there's a good point here at the end of the abstract. And I recommend reading the paper. It's online for free. But about sort of perverse incentives, making human behavior more predictable for the client of the prediction, the manager, the corporation, the police officer, often means making life and work more unpredictable for the target of the prediction, the employee, the applicant, the system. So I think a great example of this is like the Amazon warehouse workers, right, who have very limited constraints on what they can do, or the drivers, right? So there was something that launched a while ago where you got points taken away if your truck was like, you are braking too much, points taken away, even if you were braking to avoid an accident, right? So it takes that power and the agency away from individuals and moves it towards organizations and people with money. Yeah. Alexei says, in 17 ways from the start of the war, 14,000, Jesus Christ, people were unlawfully arrested. Then people stopped counting. Yeah, I imagine it gets hard. China is effed up, but there's a difference between arresting people for jaywalking and trying to make a government to follow their own laws. So like holding a government accountable. I mean, yeah. And Brett says, machine learning uses data based on unconscious racisms from the police, or, I mean, you know, conscious racisms. Also that. Yeah. Yeah. American policing is, I would argue, deeply broken. Chrono says, the tracker Amazon was using was so bad on the trucks. Yeah, and it put people in danger, and it didn't give employees the autonomy they needed to do their work and succeed in their job. So, yeah. All right. So also on the ethics front, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So this is a blog post from OpenAI on their, actually, I can just scroll, it should be fine. On what they did before training Dolly 2, so the much bigger actual state-of-the-art model. I don't know if it's still state-of-the-art, but at some point it was, version of Dolly Mini, and how they tried to prevent malicious use. I don't know. I think that my risk tolerance is much lower than OpenAI's, and they as an organization have done many things that I would not have as an individual. Let me put it that way. But I do appreciate that they took mitigations, right? Better than nothing. And I do appreciate that they sort of discussed it, because I think that it's helpful for people working in this field. And like I said, I don't work in computer vision, but I think that a lot of this also applies or can apply to, you know, language data as well. So the first thing that they did is that they removed violent and sexual images. And the idea there is that the system is generating images. If it doesn't have examples of these, it's going to be harder for it to generate it. Not impossible, but harder. In the second section, we find that filtering training data can amplify biases and describe our technique to mitigate this effect, right? So you're changing the underlying population, which is going to change the type of patterns that are detectable in it. For example, without this mitigation, we noticed that models trained on filtered data sometimes generated more images depicting men and fewer images depicting women compared to models trained on the original data set. So the mitigation caused an amplification of bias that was not present in the original data set. I'm guessing due to the removal of sexual images. That's just my hunch. In the final section, we turn to the issue of memorization, finding that models like Dolly 2 can sometimes reproduce images that were trained on reproduce images that they were trained on rather than creating novel images. Also a problem in language data, just like the collab thing we were talking about. In practice, we found that this image regurgitation is caused by images that are replicated many times in the data set, probably not the case with collab, and mitigate the issue by removing images that are visually similar to other images in the data. So this is just sort of like a practical step that you can take where you remove repetitions. And I think that that would work for text data as well. And in fact, something that I've recommended people doing if they have trouble getting something in text data, an underlying pattern in text data, is to repeat. Right? So if you're trying to get like, I'm trying to think of a specific example that is very simple, but also not a good place to use a rule. So if you're trying to provide examples of somebody providing a way to get a ticket, and you notice that often your users will say, I want to buy a ticket, I want to buy a ticket, I want to buy a ticket in the same way, you may want to repeat that training example in your training data to increase how it's weighted, because it is being seen a lot more often in real life, right? So language does not have a uniform frequency. Generally, it has sort of a Zipfian curve, and you want to capture that in your training data. If not capturing it hurts the model performance down the line, right? So if the only thing anyone was using Dolly 2 for was Apple species identification, right? Like, it's a Cosmic Crisp, it's a Granny Smith, it's a Albemarle Pippin or whatever, then I would say, hey, don't take out those repeated pictures of apples. Those are going to be important, right? That sort of thing. That was a little bit of a tangent, but yeah. So I'm not gonna go through and read the whole blog post. Y'all can do that if you want, and I'll pop in the I'll pop in the link as well if you want to check it out. I think it's good that they did it. I think there's some good, practical tips in here. But yeah, I think sometimes fundamentally the tool itself has a large potential for harm, and you need to be a little bit more careful about what you just put out there, is my stance on the matter. Yeah. Brett says, would love to see back boxes on vehicles to stop constantly bad drivers. I'm not entirely sure I know what you mean about that, but sort of like detecting... I know in Singapore, I don't know if it's still the case, but there used to be, for trucks and maybe for cars, there was a siren on every single car, and if you exceeded the speed limit, the siren went off. So I think that's sort of the thing that you're talking about, which is algorithmic decision making, right? It is deciding whether or not you're going fast enough to send off the siren. But yeah, New Zealand police call it unconscious racism. And Brett says Dolly 2 uses serious processing power. Yeah, understatement. OpenAI has a lot of cache to train big models. Using repeats to weight the model, great idea. Yeah, it can help. Sometimes you can get sort of weird outcomes because of it, but if you are genuinely working in a in a situation with a specific distribution, capturing that in the data can be helpful. All right, politics. And like I said, most of this section is not going to be on the US. We'll get there. Tea. All right. So first of all, I put this in politics instead of ethics. I guess I could have also put it in ethics. This gave me hives. This is one of the worst things I've read this week. I mean, it's very well written, it's very good and important, but Jiminy Cricket. So it is about South Africa. Coda says, I think OpenAI has a partnership with Azure. I'm pretty sure they do, because they have, like Microsoft has exclusive rights to GPT-4, I believe. Yeah. And I mean, they're using a lot, so I'm sure they get a good bulk deal. And this is by Karen Howe, who is amazing. One of the best tech reporters out there today. She's absolutely fantastic. And this actually came out a while ago, and it's sort of been on my to-read list for a bit, and it just I happened to get to it this week, and it was... Anyway, so basically what's happening is in South Africa, a bunch of private companies are building surveillance networks and doing things like running people's license plates, using facial recognition, right? Doing predictive policing, crime detection. And if you don't know much about the history of South Africa, it was settled by, I think, mainly the Dutch. And so there's this sort of, rich white ruling class, a much poorer black class of Native Africans who, are from there. I don't know the dates for apartheid, but it was a lot of it. It was a particularly bad example of segregation and racialized violence. And there's a lot of reflexes of that in their society, which as an American, I know what that's like. Perhaps not to quite the same depth, but the thing that really stuck out to me here was this section further down. Yeah, excellent. Is this section here where basically they're pointing out that the use of private surveillance technology that's paid for by the rich people, who are mostly white, is continuing to, create and amplify these harms. Brett says, maybe we could help people drive safer. I mean, my solution would be less cars, right? Just go even further down that route. South Africa, Elon Musk is from South Africa. He is, yes. Chrono Zero says, yikes, South Africa. Yep. And I mean, I don't know. It didn't have to be this way, right? Anyway, but it's the series that Karen Howe is writing is on colonialism, and I think this is like such a cut and dried example of the harms of colonialism, like well after, I don't think, Denmark directly rules South Africa anymore, but the harms and the, social system continues. And it was this section in particular that just I had to go take a little walk. It's predominantly white people who have the means to pay for surveillance. Again, these are private companies, and predominantly black people who end up without a say about being surveilled, which, I mean, same thing in the US, right? Not quite to the same, same degree, but disproportionately. Adding to it all, AI tools like facial recognition and anomaly detection don't always work, and the consequences aren't evenly distributed. The likelihood that facial recognition software will make a false identification increases dramatically when footage is recorded outdoors, under uncontrolled conditions, so surveillance, and that risk is much greater for Black people. In many ways, the cameras have recreated the digital equivalent of passbooks or international passports, an apartheid-era system that the government used to limit Black people's physical movements in white enclaves, says Michael Quett, a visiting fellow at Yale Law School who studied the South African surveillance industry. Again, people are getting rich off of this. Technology workers are making bank, and people are being harmed. And first wrote about the phenomena in Vice in 2019. Only Black people were required to hold the passbooks. White people moved freely. Crook says such claims purposefully attempted to mislead the people to create fear instead of hope, where technology is successful in fighting crime. This, of course, is someone who is benefiting from these systems. So, yeah, it's a great series. I'm so glad that it's being written, but I think, this is a particularly egregious example of the phenomenon that we talked about, the sort of the general pattern where prediction is an extraction of discretion, where some people get to make decisions and have freedom and do things, and other people don't. And it's because of automated systems, and it's happening at scale. Anyway. Also, this is one we talked about this very briefly last week. So this is proposed legislation in the EU. I do not think it's gone into effect. If you're in the EU, maybe talk to your representatives about it and how it's a bad idea. But it's an online child abuse law to reduce child abuse, if that's not clear from the headline. And the basic worry here is this. So according to proposal, providers of applications will face legal consequences unless they report any information indicating potential online child sexual abuse. So not only would providers be required to scan all communications, but to avoid liability, they would most likely err on the side of caution and massively over-report people's communication. So this would create, a lot of us use technology from companies that are in the EU, so it would, create basically a global surveillance network, and not a good thing. So if you're in the EU, maybe talk to your representatives and suggest that this is a bad idea. And if you sort of want to know how that plays out, in the US, we had sort of a similar law called SESTA and FOSTA. It's two laws that was supposed to prevent sexual trafficking, has done nothing of the kind, and instead has tremendously harmed a lot of people, particularly sex workers, and has resulted in a lot of platforms that made a lot of money off of sex workers just no longer hosting their content at all, period. So yeah, as a technologist, I'm horrified. As a citizen of the world, I'm also not happy. So yeah, if you have any sway with European political organizations, just let them know. Maybe bad, maybe don't do that. Because again, when we did something similar in the US, none of the promised benefits happened and a lot of harms did. Anyway. Yeah. Brett says, South Africa still has large gated communities. Yeah, that's my impression as well. Alexi says, on the other hand, the big guys are getting more transparent to the small guys using the same technology. We just have to be better than them. All right, so this is proposed legislation in the United States. Virginia Mercury is like a local Virginia news organization, nonprofit. And basically, this is, so if you're not familiar with dark patterns, it's like a design choice that makes it much easier for you to share your information than to not share your information, right? Or makes it much easier to do the thing that the company wants you to do and much harder to do the thing that you may want to do and not what the company wants you to do. And I believe this is going to be specifically focusing on collecting personal information. It's proposed in the US. And the reason it's in a Virginia newspaper is that Mark Warner is one of our senators. So anyway, keep an eye on that. That would, obviously affect people working in UX and design, probably also affect AI a little bit. Also, US legislation. Sorry, there's a little bit of US stuff in here. We talked a little bit about the America Data Privacy and Protection Act. So in the US, we don't have a constitutional guarantee of privacy. We have a constitutional guarantee against search and seizure, kind of. It's definitely been weakened. And we have I guess the Third Amendment, that you can't quarter troops in your home. So you have that sort of kind of guarantee of privacy about not having to have, troops sleep in your home. But yeah, in general, we don't have very strong privacy protections, and they are even weaker now because one of the things that Roe v. Wade, which has just been overturned, did was establish, or strengthen a right to privacy, basically, which has now been weakened. The Data Privacy and Protection Act might have helped with that. However, unfortunately, it's not looking great that it may actually pass, right? Yeah, so this is an opinion piece. It's a little bit sassy in tone, but if it does pass, it's probably going to be a very difficult thing, and it's not going to look anything like it does now. So TBD, it's been advanced by subcommittee members, but I don't think it's yet out of committee. All right. Alexi says, oof, yeah. I don't know. It may still pass, right? Especially now, since I think a lot of Americans are particularly thinking about online privacy in light of Roe being overturned. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see. Keep an eye on it. And if you're in the US, maybe reach out to representatives. Another great story from Rest of the World, our favorite news outlet. Argentina's Supreme Court backs Google, says the right to be forgotten can infringe on freedom of information. So this is I'll post a link to this one as well. Alexi says in South Korea, they have quite restrictive laws about personal data, not very enforceable these days. Yeah, I mean, they could be, right? Everyone's following GDPR now, right? Because those fines are very big and they're bigger for bigger companies. So there's a financial incentive for them to care. But if there's no financial incentive for them to care and a financial benefit if they don't, then why would they, right? And I mean, perhaps in the US legally they can't, like boards can't, because they have a fiduciary duty to stockholders. So they have to do whatever would make stockholders the most money, even if it's a morally wrong thing Yeah, so this is a story from Rest of the World, and basically, excuse me, one sec. Better. Oh, sorry. I've changed my compressor. I think it's picking up a little bit of mouth sounds now. So this was a woman who many decades ago was talked about in a cocaine-related scandal. And if you searched on Google, it was coming up, and she said it was harming her, and she wanted, the right to be forgotten. She didn't want to be like, that's the thing that came up when you Googled her, because it was a really long time ago. And Google says, no, we don't want to do that. And the Argentina's Supreme Court just backed them. So, and of course, this is affecting Argentina, but, keep an eye on. And then another thing that I mentioned earlier is this book. So I haven't read it. And this Karen Howe is not this Karen Howe. These are different people. I'm pretty sure, I'm like 99% sure they're different Karen Howes because they have different Twitter handles. Nope, I went too far, sorry. But she recommends, she is China Tech and Society at the Wall Street Journal, and she recommends this book, which is forthcoming, Surveillance State Inside China's Quest to Launch a New Era of Social Control. So if you're interested in surveillance and authoritarianism and China, check it out. And that is by Josh Chin. One sec, I'm just going to clear my throat. All right, now that the audio poison is over. Alexi says, what tea are you drinking? I'm actually drinking Yaupon tea. That's Y-A-U-P-O-N, which is a type of holly bush native to North America, and it is our only native caffeinated plant. So yeah, I've been trying to, I don't know, I like native plants. I've been trying to do more native gardening, etc. I don't have a Yaupon holly bush. I'm a little bit out of zone for them, but that's what I'm drinking. Brett says, I guess if you were in the newspaper, then you could go and say you want to redact an old story about you. I think it's more that she didn't want it to keep being brought up, right? But yeah. Or I think another thing that might be relevant here is, if you were trans and you didn't want your dead name to be widely distributed and discussed, or like stories about you to be under your dead name, that could be potentially another application. I'm not a lawyer. It just seemed relevant. All right. Chrono Zero says, I want to try that tea now. Yeah, you should. You should. It's kind of got a, I mean, you can process it different ways, but it's sort of got a little bit of like a grassy, halfway between like a matcha and a, I would say like a matcha and an oolong kind of is the taste. And it doesn't have any tannins in it, so you can steep it for as long as you like. It's sort of like a pu'er like that. So yeah, if you like it, I would try it. If you're interested in it, I would try it. You don't know if you like it until you try it. Yeah. No. All right, abortion. So if you're not aware, the United States Supreme Court this week, they have one more day of decisions. It's coming out today, which will be great. We get to find out whether or not we get to have a federal government. Sorry, it's been a kind of a rough week in terms of Supreme Court cases. Overturned Roe v. Wade, which was the court case which established the right to have abortions in the United States, and also the right to privacy, was how it was argued, and it being overturned means that in states, so basically whether or not you can have an abortion is now a states' right issue. Unlike other decisions they made where things where states made a decision are now actually not states' right issues, as it turns out. Anyway, it's been a rough week, like I said. So when it was overturned, a bunch of states immediately outlawed abortions, like Louisiana. They had like laws that had been passed that would trigger when Roe was overturned. And then there's a lot of legislation moving through different state legislatures, again, to try and make abortion illegal. And this has a lot of relevance for us in tech, which is why I'm talking about it here. And the first thing I want to do is just like start on, I don't know, a high note, but the Tech Workers Coalition, I will paste that in, which is, nonprofit volunteer organization that does organizing for tech workers like me, perhaps like you, has an article they published that has a bunch of information. And I would, first thing I do is like maybe pass this around to your network so they have information on, how to stay safe, how to, take care of yourself online, some information on, abortion funds and things like that, and then places to donate and volunteer. And most importantly, they also include a little section about what tech workers can do. So I think a big thing that we can do is we can provide, we can pressure our employers to provide GDPR levels of protection to everybody, including deletion rights, right? So GDPR, I can, call, a company if I'm a European citizen and say like, hey, get rid of my data, and they have to. And if we could do that for everybody, that would be great, because some of that data may include information that would potentially be used in court cases against people who got abortions or had miscarriages and were accused of having abortions. And also, pressure your company to protect people seeking reproductive health services and solutions. And the Electronic Frontier Foundation has a collection of points here as well. So some good resources, some good things to, pressure your leadership to do, particularly if you can do it with a bunch of your coworkers. Why is it important? So I have lost or accidentally deleted the relevant tab. One sec, let me get it. Yeah. Alexi says, the whole abortion thing is messed up. I didn't expect it in the 21st century. Yeah, a lot of people did, unfortunately. Yeah, let me really quickly get something. It's an important link, and I think I have accidentally deleted it because sometimes I do that. I'm just going to the links that I uploaded to the people who are in the links tier of membership. Here it is. Okay. So I'm just going to post it here. So why is it important that tech companies take steps to protect people? And why is it important that people take invitations? Oh, hello! Welcome, Overgrown Carrot. Thank you for reading me. We're talking about abortion, by the way. So we just talked about, and I'll repaste the link because I think it's helpful, some things that tech workers can do. And now we're going to talk about, why it's important that we do those things. So here is the link to the sort of the information and, resources and suggestions for tech workers is at the bottom. So the reason that it is important is because information about people online. We talked about data brokers, right? So that I can take multiple pieces of information, combine it, get very, very targeted information about individuals and very personal information. And there is already precedent for online search histories being used in court cases against women who, have abortions or have miscarriages and are accused of having abortions. I shouldn't say just women, everyone, anyone who is in a situation where they can become pregnant, is at risk here. And there was actually a court case in, I believe, 2018. Let's see. I'm trying to find the link in here, but there was a court case in 2018 where a woman was accused of having an abortion. Here we go. In 2018, a grand jury indicted Mississippi's Latice Fisher for second-degree murder after she experienced a pregnancy loss in a case that turned in part on her web search history, right? So people's information about their online habits, data about them is being used in court. It's not protected by subpoena, from subpoena. even in situations where like you provide information to researchers, research data is not protected from subpoena, can be gotten during, by lawyers. And if you're unfamiliar, about a quarter of pregnancies, of all pregnancies, end in miscarriage. And in a situation where that is, it is a crime to have an abortion. And also people are, in some states, have the potential to have a financial reward for reporting somebody for having an abortion. Suddenly a lot of people are in very, very, clear risk, right? And having information, even if, very innocently, you were just looking up information about abortions, maybe after this case passed or after this news item, and you just sort of wanted to know what was happening, it could potentially be used against you in court. So information in this situation is very, very potentially damaging to individuals, and having that information, having it be accessible is worrying, right? Potentially very harmful. What can we do? So another organization that is really relevant here is the Center for Democracy and Technology, who has some pretty clear guidance about what tech companies can do, right? So I think many of us work at tech companies or want to someday, and as workers, you have a lot of power to affect what happens, right? So the reason that Google doesn't offer facial recognition as a technology is because workers protested against it together. Right, that's what the Tech Worker Coalition is about, organizing, coming together as a community, saying, hey, no, we won't do this. And so to quote the Center for Democracy and Technology, in this new tech environment, tech companies must step up and play a crucial role in protecting women's digital privacy and access to online information. There are a variety of ways to do this, including strengthening and expanding the use of end-to-end encryption. So that's the thing that the EU sort of child abuse law that requires that all information is scanned by providers would do away with. So end-to-end encryption is very important for protecting privacy. Limiting the collection, sharing, and scale of information that can reveal a person's pregnancy status. I should also say about the use of end-to-end encryption, there is legislation that keeps coming up in the US called the Earn It Act, which would, EARN-IT, which would threaten the legality of end-to-end encryption in the US. So we're not out of that water quite yet. Limiting the collection, sharing, and sale of information that can reveal a person's pregnancy status. You can't share information you do not have, and you probably shouldn't sell some of it. And refraining from using artificial intelligence predictive tools that could reveal users' pregnancy status. So just don't use it. Don't have it as a class. Don't even try to look for it, right? If you're currently doing it, stop it. You can directly, immediately harm your customers by continuing to do it, and users, even if they're not customers. Alexei says, apart from the fact that people should take care of people, depriving more than half the population of a basic human right is anti-human. I hope it will be solved soon. Me too, but I mean, at this point in the US, we're going to need to have every single state legislature agree that that's a good idea. And certainly in Virginia, we have already legislation that's being moved forward to make it illegal, which hopefully won't pass. I don't want to focus too much on Virginia politics because I know most of you aren't from Virginia, but it's where I am, and that's what I care about. I mean, I care about everybody, but it's most immediate to me, Companies should ensure that content moderation policies, practices, and algorithms do not suppress access to information related to reproductive health. Crucially, companies should carefully scrutinize and seek to limit the scope of surveillance demands issued in prosecutions to enforce anti-abortion laws. Like, don't just say yes. Protect your users. They should adopt clear and consistent standards for refusing overbroad requests, commit to giving their users timely notice of requests, and report publicly the number of surveillance demands they receive to increase public accountability. So here are some super clear demands you can make for your employer if you're working with people's data, which if you're in AI, you probably are. Another sort of, to put this in context, one sec, let me move this out. Woo, it's gone. So this is from Eva Side, the director of cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The difference between now and the last time that abortion was illegal in the United States, which I want to say was in the 70s, but I could be wrong about that, is that we live in an era of unprecedented digital surveillance. Ascertainment says, I love America, but your politics sounds so messed up there. Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit of a rough patch. I'm thinking about the history of America. There's a lot of rough patches. Yeah, I think foundationally, the colonialist mindset and Christian theocracy has really shaped the country. Everybody's got problems though, right? And there's plenty of good things about America, and lots of really wonderful people who live here. So I think it's worth fighting for. So continuing this thread, and this is talking specifically about tech companies, what they can do, what they should do to protect people, right? I mean, again, just thinking about it from a very self-serving, self-centered perspective, if your users and or customers are in jail, they cannot give you money. So keeping them out of jail is probably good and in your best interest. Yeah, Alexi says, make them agree. Everything else is a half measure. Yeah, unfortunately, it's complicated. Yeah. Hey, Ravi. Red says, no worry about Virginia politics. It's keeping it real and giving us a connection to someone in the affected area. Yeah. And I do genuinely, I love Virginia. I love the people here. I think I am at heart an optimist, and I am at heart believe that if we're all working together, things will get better. But we can't just hope, right? I am outside of sort of my tech life. I'd say I'm pretty politically active. I, got my senators on speed dial, as you do. But we've all, right, voting, okay, sorry, I'm talking to the Americans here, but also anybody else in a democratic system, voting is necessary but not sufficient. Absolutely first step, get everybody out there to vote, get them educated, help them know who's running for office. Second step is let your representatives know that you got an eye on them and what it is that you value. If you don't tell them, they've got to guess. And it is dead simple to talk to your legislators. If you've never done it, lots of them you can email. If it is for a vote that's upcoming quickly, you can also call. If you call on the weekend or evening Eastern time, DC time, often no one will answer and you can just leave a message, but they do listen to and tally all the messages if you have a little bit of phone anxiety. Or you can just call and talk to a staffer. And they write it down, they tally it, they see what their constituents are saying, and call your representatives and tell them that you are a constituent, right? You can give them your zip code and be like, hey, this is where I'm from. You can also call their local offices. You can set up time to meet with them. The bigger the number of constituents they have, the harder it's going to be to meet with them, right? So city council member, usually fairly easy. State senator, going to be a little bit more difficult, right? The senators that go to DC, because they're representing, everyone in your state. But yeah, it's not scary. You can do it. So continuing to think about this from the tech company standpoint, if tech companies don't want to have their data turned into a dragnet against people seeking abortions and people providing abortion support, they need to stop collecting that data now. Don't have it for sale. Don't have it when a subpoena arrives. And I would say just in general, it's a good best practice to never collect data you don't need, right? And I know, we're in AI, we're in ML. We're I'm just gonna, I want my data hoard. I want to have all this data. What if I need it later? If you need it later, you can collect it later. Remember that language data changes over time, so the most recent data is always going to be the most useful. Tell yourself that and then just delete it. Delete what you don't need. Delete what you're not actively using. Now is not the time to shrug and say it's too late and nothing can be done. Now is the time to ask hard questions at work. My little sole proprietorship. I'm asking questions. You hold the world's data in your hands and are about to be asked to use it to be repression's little helper. Don't. Search data matters. Location data matters. Health data matters. Contact lists and friends lists matter. The contents of messages matter, and so does the metadata. If you work in tech, this is what you should be protecting right now. So talk to your coworkers, talk to your boss, talk to product owners, and be like, hey, I would love to protect our users. I would love to protect our customers. Let's get in there. Let's do what we can to be proactive to make sure that they are not harmed by using our products and can keep using our products in the future, right? That's what we want. Yeah. Yeah. Robbie says, British is the king of colonialism and they colonized almost 80% of the world. Yep, I mean, America being part of that. Yeah, and then some sort of discussion about different, stances on abortion. I mean, regardless of your personal stance, I think that bodily autonomy is extremely important and should be preserved, because if we don't have that, right, if you don't have control over your body and what you can do with it, you just aren't free, period. Yeah. Chad Noob says, have you heard of the wave of men installing period tracking apps to introduce chaos into the system? I have not. I would say some men do have periods, so it is not just, there are other reasons that a man might want to use a period tracking app. But yeah, I think data poisoning, as like an activist can be effective, but it sort of depends on how good of a job you do, right? So. Yeah. All right. Oh, I did have it. It was just in a different tab than I thought it was. And so to make it a little bit more concrete about the type of data that currently exists and is currently owned by Facebook. Goodbye. There we go. Okay. Facebook has a lot of is not covering itself in glory right now. Let me put it that way. So first of all, they have this very, very sensitive information. So I don't know how familiar you are with anti-abortion clinics, but sometimes in the US you'll be like driving someplace and you'll see like a bulletin board and it'll say like pregnant, worried, call us, right? Or like need to find out if you're pregnant now, call us, right? And usually those are ads for clinics. They're not medical organizations, usually being run by faith-based organizations where the purpose of the clinic is to stop people from having an abortion and having access to reproductive care of that kind. And some of them, I guess, might be medical facilities, but my understanding is that almost always they are not. And because these are organizations whose first, goal is to prevent abortions and also punish people who want to get them, and they collect a lot of private information. So there was an example of somebody who went to one of these. Basically, she was tricked, right? She thought she was going to an abortion clinic. She was actually going to a clinic run by anti-abortion activists, and they took a picture of her ID and they had her address and they had photos of her there. And that information is, obviously very detailed, very sensitive, very private, and is being held by non-medical organizations, which also means it's not protected by HIPAA. Yeah, I did see that, Brett. We're going to talk about that in just a sec. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, bye, Chrono. I have to head to a meeting, but I enjoyed your stream and look forward to it. Chad says, I'm just trying to help. I think I have 2 installed. Yeah. So I would say if it is an app that does not store data locally, that could be particularly helpful. Yeah, so Facebook definitely has that information. And if you'll remember, Facebook is also a little bit in hot water right now for HIPAA violation, but from collecting information from hospital patient intake portals, which is, again, very sensitive, very private information that is protected by HIPAA. And I believe that there's a court case forthcoming, TBD, not sure. But yeah, so Facebook definitely has a history of HIPAA violations at this point. And even if this is not HIPAA data, it is still sensitive medical data. Interesting thing, so Facebook actually says they don't do this, but they definitely are doing it based on multiple reports. So this is Facebook's own information about sensitive health information. And they say, at Meta, we have policies about the kinds of information businesses can share with us. We don't want websites or apps sending us sensitive information about people. And the thing that I thought was particularly interesting was this bit. If Meta's signals filtering mechanism detects business tools data that it categorizes as potentially sensitive health-related data, the filtering mechanism is designed to prevent that data from being ingested into our ad ranking and optimization systems. Based on the reporting, it absolutely was not, right? It was possible to be used for ad targeting. Again, based on this report here. And it includes information on sexual and reproductive health. So it seems like Facebook may be in violation of their own policies, but also they're not saying we don't do it. They're saying that we have some automated filter that will try and catch it before we do too much with it and, you know, make too much money off of it. So yeah, I think it's the way that I think most people might interpret this policy, I think is not actually what this policy says potentially, because, you know, we're in machine learning. We know what the error rates look like. Yeah. So, and this is specifically using it for ads ranking and optimization. So I don't think Facebook has said that they're not going to collect this information, and I would be very wary. Brett says, super creepy private business. Yeah. A servant says, Facebook disclaimer alert. Yep. Yeah. Brett says, not for ads doesn't mean the data is not sold. That's very true. Yeah. So I would not talk about things on Facebook, basically, is where my recommendation would be right now, because I just don't trust Meta, given their history. Speaking of, so this is something that Brett mentioned, is that Instagram and Facebook removed posts offering abortion pills. And this seems to have been straight up rule-based. So there were some experiments done by a couple of reporters, and I think they've been, replicated since is the word that I looked at. So the Instagram has been taking down posts immediately for people saying, hey, DM me, direct message me if you want to order abortion pills or the morning after pills, and want them sent to my address instead of yours, right? So it is perfectly legal to order these pills in the US. It's perfectly legal to send them across state lines, but it was taken down immediately in a way that to me suggests that there is absolutely some sort of algorithmic filtering, or somebody wrote a rule, right? Somebody wrote a regex and was like, take down these posts. And the thing that I think is particularly, telling here is, and that tells me that this is a hand-built rule that somebody went in and did, is that when the AP reporter made the exact same post but swapped out the word abortion pills for a gun, the post remained untouched. So the abortion pill post was flagged with this warning, which says Facebook said that it violated its standards on guns, animals, and other regulated goods, but changing it to a gun, which presumably is a class of the thing, an item in the class of things guns, did not do it, and also weed was left up. So the same post with just the word abortion pills replaced with a gun, perfectly fine, according to Facebook, even though it does directly violate the standards. Same if it was weed was the word that was replaced. So yeah, completely legal thing to do. Facebook decided to take it down. Somebody made this decision. And when I'm saying that like tech workers have power, this is what I mean, right? Somebody did this, or somebody's, or a team, and they could have chosen not to do it. Yep. So, yeah. Also, I promise we will look at palette cleanser after this. There's been a lot of discussion recently about period tracking apps. So these are, apps you have on your phone that let you say, like, to help you figure out when your period's going to be, when you're ovulating, things like that. Or even if you don't have a period or ovulate, if you have like a lot of estrogen, it tends to cycle in a 28-day cycle, and it can affect a lot of things. Like a lot of weightlifters will change their lifting pattern based on their cycle. Lots of reasons to use these. And the most downloaded one on the App Store, it's been updated. Okay, so it was updated after I found it, but previously their policy said we may disclose your anonymized encrypted data to third parties in order to protect the legal rights, safety, and security of the company and users of our service, enforce our terms of service, and prevent fraud, and comply with or respond to law enforcement or legal process or a request for cooperation by a government or other entity, whether or not legally required. So basically, this app was saying, like, yeah, even if we don't have to do it, we'll give them your data if they ask us. And I think that this bit has now been removed, and that is the change. And the reason that that is, in the US situation, very concerning is because, again, right, I mentioned that one of the few privacy rights that we do have is protection against search and seizure, unreasonable search and seizure. And usually to get data, you would need to get a warrant. But if you can just ask the company and they say yes, why would you bother getting a warrant? So, yep. And this has now been updated. It now says it will comply with or respond to law enforcement or legal processes or requests for cooperation by a government or other entity when legally required. Any health data that the company is legally required to share cannot be linked to you and will remain anonymous. All right, so they've updated this policy. And I'd be willing to bet that they've actually probably updated their actual policy internally about what they'll do and not just the verbiage externally. So I think this is a great example where public scrutiny caused a change in the company's behavior. And I think, if it had been done within from employees, and I don't know if it was or not, it probably would have happened even faster. So change can happen. As tech workers, we have a lot of agency. We have a lot of ability to make change. And I think, in your work, trying to really protect your users and your customers is, we have a lot of ability and capacity to do that and to mitigate these harmful effects and to help. So anyway, in general, I think there's a lot of, sorry, I don't know if you heard that, but sometimes when my dog wants attention, he'll go, meow. He'll make little pew sounds. It sounds like he wants attention right now. Yeah. Brett says it would be interesting to see what state wrote that rule. So I think in this particular case, it is the company itself that made the update. But yeah, it's very much sort of like question mark right now, right? There's legal precedent has been changed. We don't know what that's going to look like in terms of prosecution. And it's also, happening at hospitals. So I've read some stories where hospitals have a new policy that they won't remove ectopic pregnancies. So that's a pregnancy that happens in the fallopian tube, which cannot possibly survive, but if it grows large enough, can kill the person who is pregnant. And not removing ectopic pregnancies until the health of the person who is pregnant becomes like critically bad, because again, they don't know what the legal precedent is going to be. There's a lot of questions right now, but what we can do as tech workers is we can safeguard users' data. And I would say that as engineers, we have, maybe not legally, but I would say morally, we have a duty of care towards the people who use the things that we build. And it's important that we act in their best interests, not only, to protect our jobs and to protect our users and make sure they continue using our stuff, but also to help build the world that we want to live in, right? When I use software, I want to use software where the engineers who built it cared about me as a user and my well-being and worked to help protect me. I hope you do too. All right. Alexi says dog. Yeah. Maybe one of these days he'll come in and join in, but all right. And for a little bit of a palate cleanser, because I don't like to end on too heavy a note all the time, we've got plenty of heavy notes out there. We don't need to add too much. A great little sort of joke / fantasy story by Dr. Kate Compton, who is a weird futurist in her own words. And she's a professor at Northwestern in computer science, I believe. If you're a scammer, the copy of voice technology should only be used to spearfish the original owner of that voice by posing as a version of themselves from an alternate timeline who desperately need to tell them a way to avert the upcoming robot war using gift cards, right? So it's a very convoluted scan where you pretend to be somebody from the future and use that to get gift cards out of them, which I think is a hilarious idea. Yeah, so that is all that I have for you today. My voice is going. My God, it's been almost 2.5 hours. We had a lot to talk about. And just another, like I said, we have agency, we have power as individuals, we can choose to do things. I know that it can be really easy to be overwhelmed. It can be really easy to, wherever you are, whatever your situation is, whatever your political system is, it can be really easy to feel like you don't have any ability to affect change, but you do. And believing that you don't have an ability to affect change is you're playing right into the hands of people who are making things the way you don't want them. So yeah, just support each other, support yourselves, be nice to yourselves, have a nice weekend, do something fun, maybe go for a nice walk outside or something if the weather's nice. Yeah. Alexi says, I would really appreciate your coverage on the invasion of Ukraine. How can NLP savvy people help it? I'm assuming you do not mean help Russia invade the Ukraine there, or invade Ukraine. Sorry, I grew up saying the Ukraine. It's been some unlearning for me. Yeah, I don't think I am informed enough to talk on that. And in a situation like that, I think that, well-intended but bumbling or like uninformed efforts are likely to make things worse and not better. So I'm probably not going to talk about that. But if anyone has good information, please reach out and let me know. I've left coding now. No, not really. Mostly I'm doing, educational content. But yeah, I'm working on other stuff. And the stream on Tuesday was a coding stream. So yeah, I am not currently building any software products, if that's what you're asking. But I haven't stopped coding. No. Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining, everybody. I hope this was, not too much of a downer. Like I said, believe in yourself, believe in your friends, reach out to people. You've got a lot of agency and power, and particularly if you work in tech, and if we're all working together, I think we can make a lot of positive change in the world. So I believe that. I really believe it right in my heart. So thanks for joining. I'll be back next Tuesday for my deep dive, and this is what I was going to do this Tuesday, but somebody asked a good question, and we're going to be talking about how to come up with research ideas, how to come up with ideas in NLP, basically, which I get so many questions on, and I keep saying the same thing, so I'm gonna do a video on it. Yeah, and I hope to see you there. Hopefully it's something you find interesting, and if it's not, I'll see you next Thursday for another week in review. So we'll do the same thing all over again. We'll talk about research, practical stuff, engineering tips and tricks, politics, legislation, if anything comes up, ethics, and have a little bit of fun. We'll try. We'll try to have fun. All right. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. Oh, wait, I have a screen. I forgot almost. I added a screen to thank my supporters, and now I need to go through and add docking AI as well. But thank you to all my monthly coffee supporters. I don't have coffee, but imagine that this is coffee. I appreciate it. So my monthly supporters, Rexarski, Matt, Phil, and Jay, and then my one-off supporters, Timothy and Code Z. And this is the wrong image. It should also have Ravi on there. Thank you, Ravi. I appreciate it. What will happen if one sec, I'm gonna try something. This may be a horrible idea, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Did it work? It worked! Fabulous. All right, and Ravinder. Yay, I'm sorry, I made a new screen, I just didn't actually download it. Could I have done this programmatically? Yeah, I probably will at some point, but at this point it's just like not that many people. But thank you, I appreciate you. And this is right now my full-time job, so you are literally helping me drink coffee. I appreciate that. All right, live editing, yeah, I do own my own production, and it is, I would not recommend it. It's a lot. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. Relax, rejuvenate, be kind to yourself and others. Think about, what you can do to make the world better. I'll see you on Tuesday. Probably. Oh, it's a holiday in the US. I may or may not stream on Tuesday. I will let you know on Twitter, and I'll also put it on the YouTube channel thing. Yeah, so stay safe, stay healthy, have a great weekend, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week for sure. Definitely on Thursday, maybe on Tuesday, TBD. All right, I'll talk to you then. Bye.